All right, now that we're recording, all right, I'll share my screen, and then all right. So here is the plan for tonight. So just some general housekeeping. We'll talk a little bit of just logistics. Kind of where we are. Hopefully, I know it's been. I know that it's been the disjointed where we met, and then now it's been a month. And that's never the case, but well, maybe we'll have to figure that out in the future because we've have two trips going, and then we had Easter right there in the middle of that. So the other trip, that's why these are getting messed up. So I apologize for that, and we'll figure that. As we do more of these trips, we'll have to. This is not something we haven't had a May trip and a June trip before, so it's something we're learning. So I apologize for the. I know it's been a little disjointed, but hopefully you have been keeping up with the pre-trip itinerary, and we'll look at that, and then we'll review. Hopefully you've had at least your first missionary conversation. We'll review that, and then we'll look at, I know some of you, you emailed me and you're like, what's our goal in these conversations? What are we trying to accomplish in these missionary conversations? And that's the point of not giving you any, guidance on that, is to kind of see how it goes first. And then we introduce you to sort of the training, and hopefully you've read Tactics, and we'll talk a little bit about that tonight. And you'll start to see why we think the tactical approach is is just a great way to have these conversations and to make these conversations, normalize them as a part of your life. But I will kind of also kind of double back and just talk about, what does it even mean to be a Christian? And again, I think this trip does lots of things. Certainly tells us, helps us to evangelize and understand, why evangelism is important, how to do it. But it also is going to challenge us to know what we believe and why we believe it. And so we'll talk about that a little bit. Okay, so hopefully you finished Tactics and you've started on the Ambassador's Guide to Mormonism. My son has both my copies here. We'll talk a little bit about Tactics tonight. I know that many of you are in school. And so maybe, like Leah was saying, she's just finals, and Cole's got final. You got finals. So if you haven't read Tactics yet, just, start on it as soon as you can, right? I mean, so Tactics is the only book, that we're assigning. The Ambassador's Guide and What If Christianity is True, or I can, kind of more booklets. And then if you want to go deeper, I do have this right here. If you want to go deeper, and maybe for many of you, if you've been around Ratio Christi for a while, hopefully you're at your chapter, you've talked about Tactics, read Tactics, and you're ready to kind of take that next step, then Mormonism 101 is the book that we recommend. If you've read Mormonism 101, you've read Tactics, you've read the Ambassador's Guide, and you want more recommendations, I put some more on the field guide. But if you want some more, and you're eating this up, then email me or text me or call me or something. I can give you more. We've got lots more recommendations for books, especially if you've got some specific questions of things that are coming up and you'd like a book that specifically details certain things. Then please let me know, and I'll try to help you. The more you study, the better it's going to be when you're here for the week in June. So hopefully that's, you've got the book, you're reading it. I know we just, Alex, I know he's not on the call tonight, but just signed up last week. So obviously he hasn't read the books yet, but just, again, get caught up as best you can. But as we've said all along, don't let this be a hindrance. So if you never get all the videos watched and you don't get the books read, you can still come out here and still have a very productive trip. It's just the more that you study, the more that you're prepared, the better it will be. And we'll talk specifically about that in our next meeting a little bit more. This is, in our third Zoom meeting, and I'll tell you a little more about that at the end. So if you haven't accessed the site yet, buildersofisrael.net, our friend David Halevi, who is actually helping out with the May trip, but his family, they're moving to Israel June 1st. And so if you've watched any of the videos, you've seen him and I, he's living out here, doing the videos. He's living out here now, but his goal has always been to go to Israel, and COVID kind of shut that down for a while, but it's now opened back up. And so they are actually heading to Israel June 1st. They got funded. It's, totally a God thing. They had a lot of money that they had to raise, and God just really showed out. It was amazing. They raised all their money in like 8 days, and just really, really cool. So something to just kind of put in the back of your head. We are going to be doing these exact kinds of trips, this exact kind of trip in Israel, and hoping to do the first one next year. But David is going to make coming on this trip to Utah one of the requirements to go to Israel, because most of the Israel trips that you go on, they're awesome, they're great, but they are much more just tourist trips. I've been there, it's great, it's amazing. I mean, it literally will change the way you read scripture. But this trip that we want to put together for Israel will be much more like this, evangelism. So you'll still see all the sites, but we'll do a lot more evangelism, and there'll be a whole modules on evangelism to the Jewish people, much like the evangelism here at the LDS. So kind of think about that. Hopefully we'll have, once they get there and they get settled, we'll get some dates set up for that. I'll hopefully be next spring, and we'll hopefully do 1 or 2 of those a year as we do 3 to 5 of these a year. That's kind of the plans into the future. So if you haven't signed up yet, go on to buildersofisrael.net, get signed up for a free, remember, click the free account. That way you're not paying, and then just start watching the videos you've seen. So this is your itinerary that y'all have. You can see it, just your itinerary. And you can just go through, you'll see the videos. The field guide actually has the videos in order. So as you're watching the videos and doing the reading, hopefully, again, the more information you have, the better. And then, as I said before, I think I told you, we're beta testing all of this. So this is the first year we have 3 mission trips. We did one in March. We're doing one in May, and then we'll have y'all in June. So any feedback you have, video 3 was the worst thing I've ever watched in my entire life, or I learned nothing from this, or I don't know, get a haircut. I mean, anything that's helpful, to help us make these videos better and the trip better, we need your feedback. So that, pre-trip stuff, during the trip, post-trip, and whatever you can help us do. And then our plan is that we'll turn all of the field guide and everything that we're doing with the itinerary, we'll have that as an actual book that we'll give to participants starting next year. So as much feedback as you can give us, the better, good, bad, whatever the feedback is, please give it to us. I know that not all of you are signed up for the GroupMe. If you're not on the GroupMe, that's going to be the main way we're going to communicate while you're here. But it's also a great way to communicate just before, so if you're getting ready to go from the trip from last year, someone just posted, this was a couple weeks ago, someone was posting about an opportunity they had to meet with some LDS missionaries. And so they posted on there, can y'all pray for us, and got a chance to pray for them. And so it's just a great way to communicate. If you have questions, certainly as we get closer to the trip, if things are, questions about different topics, that's just a good way for us to communicate. So if you haven't been added to that, can you email me or text me and let me know, and then I'll send you the invite and we'll get you added, because I know that not everybody is on that. So whether you're watching this now or if you're going to watch this, this week, if you can email me, text me just with your phone number. If you don't have GroupMe, if you would just add the GroupMe, app for this trip, because it will be the primary way we connect and use that during the trip. But also it's a great way for us to talk before and after the trip. Hopefully all of us, become good friends, and we'll have lots of opportunities to chat even after the trip as well. So, that's, so please do that. So for, I think all of you, who's given, gotten your deposit in, the $100, the balance, the $400 is due this week. Technically I think we said the 1st, but if you can get it this week, great. I know some of you have already gotten it to me, but if we can get all of that in this week, then we've got all the finances part taken care of, and then I don't have to worry about that anymore. I'm working on getting all of the finances straight for this trip and the May trip. So it's just the sooner you get that money into me, the easier. That way, just one less thing that I have to worry about. There were some of you that indicated that we had talked to about, a scholarship, that you needed some help. So get me whatever money you're part of that, and then I can talk to you about the rest of that. You know who you are on that. So any questions, anything about money, finances, any of that, email me, text me, call me. I'll help you out any way I can with that. And then we are working on, so we've got a house. I'm excited about this house. It's a new house, different house we haven't used before. So I think it's going to work out really well for us, kind of for the future. So I think this could be something that we use for a long time. We're getting speakers set up, schedule. So I'll have all of that by but certainly by the time y'all come, but by the fourth meeting, we'll just go over logistics and schedule and all that. The only thing that maybe y'all need to think about now for flights, I know some of you, so if you like the Nebraska group, I think is driving in. I know some of you, the Colorado group, I think is driving in. So we're going to try to start on on Saturday. So it's June 4th. We're going to try to start around 5 o'clock that night. So we want to have dinner and then we want to do some teaching that night. I think that we're not going to be able to get into the Airbnb until later that night for some logistical reasons. So what we'll probably do is meet at my church, do dinner there, do some teaching there, and then we'll head over to the Airbnb that night. But Sunday morning, and we hit the ground running. We'll go to an evangelical church, then we'll go to a sacrament service, and then we've got stuff, literally every day. It's very heavily packed schedule. So if you are flying in, try if you can to get your plane, that Saturday on June 4th, morning-ish, afternoon, early afternoon, we can collect everybody who's coming in from the airport. I know there's not a lot of you, but we can collect everybody and then we can get you to where we need to get you to. If you're driving in, then just try to plan on being here by 5 o'clock, 5:30 that night. And we'll, again, logistically, we'll talk more about that as we get closer, but just as you're thinking through schedule-wise, if you're looking for flights, go ahead and see what you can do to do that. If there's any questions or problems, 2 trips ago, one of the students, she couldn't come, like the only trip she could get here, or the only plane, right, got here like Friday night at like midnight, and then she like walked from the airport. She like walked to the airport. It was like a really sketch hotel, and please do not do that. We'll find you a place to stay. You can stay with us. You can stay. We will find you a place to stay. So if you're, if something happens or schedule's not working out like that, just let me know. We'll figure that out because we want you to be safe. And there's certainly areas of Salt Lake that I would not recommend you staying, and she was staying in one of those areas. So, but if you can get here that Saturday afternoon, I think actually Noah. Go ahead. Yeah. Question.
Yeah. Where is here?
Salt Lake City.
Well, but I just drive around Salt Lake City till I find you.
Well, and then we'll get. I'll have all of that. So we'll have 2 more Zoom meetings. But okay. the Sunday before everyone comes, I'll have all of that. So I'll tell all the drivers where to meet us. I'll have all the logistics of the plane. Anyone who's flying here, we'll have all that.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you so much.
Yeah. And then I'll even have some suggestions of places to go if you do get here early. Sandra Tanner's bookstore is a great place to go, and I'll tell you more about that. But the last Zoom meeting, that will be the meeting right before y'all come. We'll only just talk logistics and all that. And then I'll have an itinerary that I'll get out to you. All the drivers, everybody will have addresses, times for everything. So it'll be, so we'll all be on the same page with that. But yeah, any other questions about any of that, please let me know now or afterwards. And I think Noah, I don't think he's on the call, but he's talking about, we did have a guy along 2 trips ago who was going to video the whole trip, and he was going to put together kind of a short little documentary for the trip for us, and that kind of fell through. So Noah's talking about doing that. If you have interest and want to help, if you've got video experience, if you just want to help, vlog through the trip, please let me know, because we would love to put something together to kind of promote the trip within Rancho Christi, but then outside Rancho Christi. So if that interests you and you've got some of those skills, then let me know, and maybe put you together with Noah, and then y'all can kind of talk about doing that together. Okay, so any logistics, any questions in regards to that? And again, I'll hang out afterwards. So if you've got questions, but you just don't want to ask on the call, I'll hang out. We'll turn off the recording and I can answer any questions you have. None? Okay. All right, so hopefully, right, we've had a month. Hopefully you've had your first missionary conversations. Now remember the goals. So I know some of you, again, the logistics of how this Zoom call works compared to others where ideally you've just had your missionary conversation and we're talking. So I know it's been a month and maybe you've already read tactics and those kind of things, but would anybody be willing to share, anybody have an either incredibly good or incredibly bad or an incredibly blah conversation with a missionary? And anybody will want to share about their conversation, how it went, whether good, bad, or ugly? I know Frank Turk says nobody likes to go first. Anybody want to go second? Anybody want to share? Nobody? No one had, did anybody have a conversation with the missionary? I know some of you maybe haven't even had the chance to do that yet. Anybody had one? That memorable?
I know that that two of our students that are coming arranged for a meeting with the missionaries, and 8 missionaries showed up.
Yeah.
8.
That's good. That's fair for them. Us, we have 2, they have 8. So it's,
Yeah.
we have truth on our side. Yeah. So what did it go well?
I think it was a little intimidating because it was in their building. Then it was in their building, and then there was 8 of them. And for both of these students, it was their first direct encounter with missionaries. So it was a bit overwhelming, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And honestly, that's by design. So every one of us who's done this, for a while. So, Cole, Wesley, we all of us were the first time we're like, you want us to go do what? Like that's super intimidating. Going to a meeting house for me for the first time was super scary. Everything is just, you just don't know. When we went to the polygamous community, last month, that was super nerve wracking because it's just a new experience. So, yeah. Anybody else? Anybody have any of the students, any that good, bad that you want to share?
I would just say mine was decent because of course not everything went right, but I ended up meeting with 2 missionaries in the I forget the name of the building. I think they called it a temple over on Old Cheney or something around there, and it went okay. Obviously nothing nothing got heated or anything like that, but yeah, like I said, it was a good first experience to learn kind of how they talk and stuff, and what to expect. Like I told Wesley, I noticed they say we know this to be true a lot, that exact phrase over and over. And I'd say one particular thing I learned, I ended up getting to a point where I was able to ask, how did you come to that conclusion on something? And they gave me a couple short Bible passages, just like a couple verses. And I learned the hard way that you should, if they give you Bible verses, you should ask them to read it with you then and there, because I read them later and turned out they didn't have anything to do with what we were talking about. But
yeah,
so that was one thing I learned.
Thanks for sharing, Harrison. Do you think productive, unproductive, like if you just had to rate it, would you think productive, unproductive, like how,
I would say it was definitely productive for me, at least. It didn't feel like, when it comes to putting a stone in their shoe, it didn't feel too productive necessarily in that sense, but it was at least productive for me to get used to talking to them.
Yeah, but see, and it's so this is good because you're already using the language that kind of we want you to get in the habit of using. And so when you think of it in those terms, I think you're saying, okay, this was productive, even if it didn't feel necessarily productive without some of that framework. And so one of the reasons why we're asking you to kind of just go in blind. One of the students, just kind of emailed me and she was like, what's the point of, help me understand what the point of what I'm trying to do. And I was like, no, like just, because part of it is to do it for the first time yourself and to kind of see the frustration and to see, like you said, we're kind of saying the same thing, but we're also not, but I can't exactly put my finger on it because it sounds like we're saying the same thing, but I know we're not saying the same thing. It is frustrating. Like our friend, Rob, who y'all meet, he says, it's like banging your head against the wall. And so it's so part of that is by design to kind of let y'all experience that, but it already sounds like you're already starting to assess it through the lens through which we're hoping that we start to assess it with, which is, did we put a rock in their shoe? Did we get up to bat? That kind of stuff, which is, so that's really good. Yeah, I mean, if it maybe you probably had some training on this stuff beforehand, but the idea, like if I hadn't had any training on it and I just show up and I have the conversation, one of the questions we'll ask is, would you be likely to engage in this kind of conversations again? And we've had plenty of people that say no, because it was contentious, it was frustrating, it didn't feel productive. And so the idea is, try it like that, how all of us have tried it, and then we'll introduce you to tactics, and then we'll talk about, tonight we'll talk a little bit about kind of what our goal is and help solidify that, and then and then we get up to bat again, and then hopefully you'll start to see how they can become more productive. And then obviously the goal being that when we're here, we'll have hundreds of conversations that they can become much more productive. But yeah, so that's good. I mean, I think some of them are great, and some of them you're just like, but that's true of every evangelistic conversation I've ever had. So thank you. That's good. Anybody else? Anybody have any, like, really anything get contentious, or anybody get kicked out or yelled at or do the yelling? I think we've had one or two that have turned kind of like in different groups that have turned contentious, from the beginning, but then given some training and realizing that maybe some tactics that they could use, and then really learning from that. Anybody else? I know that, like, again, no one particularly likes to volunteer, but anybody else have any other good, bad conversations? Was it different than you thought it would be? Was it, as you're kind of evaluating, hopefully you did your post conversation review, was it different than you thought it was going to be? Were they nicer, meaner? Like some of the nicest people you'll ever meet. I mean, very most of the missionaries are just very kind. There's certainly not just evil people who are trying to ruin your life. So I don't know, any other thoughts, and then we'll move on about the conversations. Anybody?
So can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So John was talking about, me and Mallory had met with some missionaries, and it was very overwhelming at first with having the 8 people in the room, because it just kept getting bigger and bigger, and we were like, oh, I didn't know we were signing up for this, because the week before, some of our other friends from Russia, Christy, had met with them, and they got into a relatively heated discussion, and they actually got told that they didn't want to continue having conversations. And so I think they're kind of gearing up to meet with us. And I think me and Mallory had a much different perspective of never having a conversation with them, so we didn't know even what to talk about. And I think that was something I learned a ton about. I was like, I mean, I don't really disagree with a lot of what they're saying, and I learned it's because the way that they word things and the way that they frame it from the beginning, it makes it seem like it is the same thing that we believe in. And that wasn't until later, talking to John and my other friends, it was like, when they talk about Jesus, it's not like Jesus that you think of. And when they talk about faith, it's not the same thing you think of. And I was like, oh, like, I just thought we were saying the same stuff. And they're like, no, like, you have to ask way more targeted questions, because we asked a ton of questions, but it just seemed like this doesn't seem like too far off. Like, definitely was some things that were off, but overall it wasn't like, wow, this is a terrible conversation, what are these people thinking? It was like, oh, we're pretty similar. And like I said, it's obviously like we're not similar in thinking. So I'm excited to watch the videos and learn much more about Mormonism and the real truth behind it, so I have better questions and ways to talk to them in the future.
Yeah, like, I mean, what you experience is what that's 99 times out of 10 that's what people experience, right? Because we're like, wait, I've been taught all this, and yet we basically seem like we're saying the same thing. In fact, I think I may have mentioned in this group, but one of our students sort of dabbled in universalism for a while after coming out here for a while, because he was like, I can't make sense of the fact that we're not saying the same thing. And so hopefully, and this was like one of the first trips we ever did out here. I mean, we weren't leading it, and we were just kind of learning, but that's part of why we wanted to do these trips too. And I think one of the things that's happening within evangelicalism is if you talk to most people and they would say, yeah, LDS are Christians, it's because they sound so alike. And so there's been books written, these are very learned, professors and, teaching at seminaries that are saying, we're basically saying the same thing. And so I think it's really important, and this is not just Mormonism, this is for everything. So when we're talking to atheists, we're talking that we're asking those questions and we're learning to ask those targeted questions, because we assume so much time, 1,000% me included, we assume that we're on the same, that we're tracking with each other. And again, most of our disagreements, if not all, come because of our assumptions that we're making that are just very different. So I'm making one assumption, they're making another assumption, and they're so different. And then we're kind of going off from there. Well, of course we're going to have weird, the conversations we're going to miss because our starting points are different. So we have to learn to ask those questions. And so that's part of, why we wanted you to have the conversation that way. But the other thing to think about, and so this is, and we'll mention more of this, as we kind of get into the material, but specifically with the LDS, they have been taught, and if you have conversations with them, and so we'll talk to you about tonight, if you get angry, you lose. If they get angry, you lose. Because they have been taught that a contentious spirit is of the devil, is of Satan. And so if you come at them with a spirit of contention, which can be obviously subjective, then immediately they're thinking, oh, okay, I know exactly what this is, right? This is someone who's of the devil. And that's why they can be very quick to cut off conversation, because obviously they don't need, they've been told in their spirit that they don't need to talk to you anymore. In fact, so when I was talking, this is Mormons. So we were talking big, broad brush Mormons, and then LDS are a subsect of Mormons. But when I was talking with the polygamous group, when we were down there, I was talking to this guy for a couple hours, and he was telling me, he's like, I detect a very contention in your spirit. So I don't want to go there. I don't want to go. He didn't want to go into polygamy at all. A friend of ours got really deep into polygamy with 3 or 4 of the sister wives. But he didn't want to go there because he said he detected a spirit of contention in me. And so that was a conversation stopper, because he didn't feel comfortable moving forward in the conversation. And so that is something that I have to constantly sort of evaluate my demeanor and the way I talk very fast. So I have to, slow down, because all of that, they're interpreting everything subjectively. And they've been indoctrinated to this idea that this is all from the evil one. So just things to think about, again, as you're wrestling through these conversations. Well, this is, that's, again, everything that y'all wrestled with. Just know that that's everything we've all wrestled with. So it's by design, and, good conversations and bad conversations. The key, again, is, we'll study some of this, and then getting up to bat, again and again and again, and learning. So part of the trip, this is why, one of the reasons why I've asked you to do the pre-trip questionnaire before you studied, right? Because again, we've talked about this, but part of the trip is obviously we're learning to do evangelism, and we're learning to share what we believe and why we believe it with people who are not Christian. So obviously we're going to use evangelism with the LDS as the means by which we're teaching evangelism. But just understand, this is evangelism across the board. This is Hinduism. This is Judaism when we go to Israel. This is atheism, secularism. This is a skill set that we can learn to be comfortable in these conversations. And one of, we want to teach evangelism, but we're also, if for many of you, this trip will be more about you and your understanding of Christianity and wrestling with that, then it will be about, the evangelism. The evangelism will be good, but every one of us, hopefully, and hopefully on this trip, will realize an area in our theology, in our view of God, the gospel, Jesus, the Bible, that we're like, that's deficient, or I'm not thinking well about it. And the group will challenge each other. And that's what's really awesome, is we'll have these great conversations every single day, and in the bus rides, and in the van rides, and in the morning, and we're just really challenging each other. And it's really fun, and it's really cool as we're opening ourselves up to challenge each other and being challenged, with the goal being that we just want to believe what's true. Francis Schaeffer wrote a lot of stuff, obviously, but he wrote a book called True Spirituality. And there's a position paper that I like that he that sort of, I think it sort of kind of came out of that, but it's a short and you can look it up online. But he talks about, it's called Two Contents, Two Realities. And I like this because I would argue to you that modern evangelicalism has rejected the top part of this, and many apologists and loving, maybe hardcore Calvinists, no, but other, have rejected the bottom part of this. But to be a fully orbed Christian, we want to hold on to all four of these. And so what he talks about, sound, two contents, two realities, two contents being sound doctrine. We must have orthodox beliefs. We'll talk about that here in a second. We must believe the right things. But we also have to be willing to be wrong and hold certain things tight and certain things looser, and be challenged, but just have a whole ethos where we're opening ourselves up to honest answers to honest questions. I mean, one of our taglines at Ratio Christi is ask good questions, seek good answers. One of the things that you'll find with the Mormons, and I would argue every other cult, is the idea that you do not ask questions. Now, this is very much a part of evangelicalism in many cases where we don't ask questions, right? And one of the lines within the LDS, within LDS people to talk to, is when the prophet is spoken, all the thinking has been done. Your job is just to believe. That's scary, right? So, I mean, whether it's your pastor, whether it's whether it's anything that I say, when we're on the trip, Jane, Wesley, Ben, Noah, John, what we're challenging, just because someone in leadership says something does not make it true. So we have to have a culture in which we're asking those questions. That's one of the reasons that Ratio Christi exists. So we have to think well about the most important things. We have to know what we believe, and that has to be tethered to reality. And then we want to have a culture in which we're asking good questions. And so some Ratio Christi chapters, unfortunately, that's where they hang out, and they just it just becomes just about that. But the other part, and Schaeffer, I think he's dead on, he says the two realities is true spirituality and the beauty of human relationships. And what do you mean true spirituality? Just like this moment by moment lived love affair with Jesus. I mean, he really eloquently kind of walks through that, and that this is not just, it's not just a theology exam on whether I'm going to be in the new heavens and the new earth. I mean, this is, Jesus says there will be plenty of people who did all these things in my name, went on mission trips, evangelized, and he's going to say, be gone, I never knew you. So there's this intimate relationship that we have with Jesus, this intimate relationship that we have that just is developed by spending time with him. And I'm spending time in his word and in prayer, and that should leak out of us, and it should overflow into the beauty of human relationships. There should be a way in which we love brothers and sisters especially, but love other people, that others, they're like, I want that, the aroma of Jesus is just everywhere, right? I mean, it's just like, I want what they have. And I would, it's easy for us, and as apologists, it's easy for me to camp out on the top two and miss the bottom two. And I think for modern evangelicalism, it's easy to camp out on the bottom two, miss the top two. But to be a fully orbed Christian, we need all of that. And so one of the things that this trip is going to try to help us to see is, what are those areas maybe where we're deficient? If all I have is I want to pound people with the truth, I'm missing just some of the bottom part, right? But if I don't know what I believe and why I believe it, and I don't, I'm just like, well, we're all kind of on different journeys up the same mountain, then I'm missing the top part. And so what this trip, I think, especially is we're trying to help you find areas, tension points in your Christian walk where you're like, oh, this is an area that's deficient. This is an area that I need to work on. Right. And so as Christians, we relativize our faith all the time, right? We treat it as our favorite flavor of ice cream. I'm a Christian, you're a Buddhist, someone else is Hindu, who really cares? But if we believe that what we believe is really real, so if you believe that what you believe is really real, then Christianity is the most important thing ever. C.S. Lewis said it's either the most important thing or it's of no importance, but what it can't be is just mildly important. If Christianity is true, it is literally the most important thing, and it should leak into every area of our life, and the way we think, the way that we act, the way that we live. I mean, every area that's under Jesus, right? There's no area in this world that God doesn't look down on and say mine. And that's the way I talk to people, the way that I love people, but it's also the things that I think about and what I believe about, the Orthodox views. And so one of the things that we kind of use this example, we say, look, if Christianity is like a house, then there are certain views that you have to put you into the house. There are certain views that if you don't have, you are not a Christian. So there was a guy named Frankie Schaeffer, ironically, Francis Schaeffer's son, which can tell you that there are plenty of Christians, and I'm not blaming Francis Schaeffer, but there are plenty of Christians and pastors who have discipled lots of people and they haven't discipled their own family. And Frankie Schaeffer is an atheist, and he wrote a book called Why I'm a Christian Atheist a few years ago. Now, you cannot deny God's existence and be a Christian. That seems like it's kind of one of these fundamentals. That's why we talk about the nature of truth, and we spend so much time on truth, because that seems like that's an essential, right? And you cannot deny Jesus's death on the cross and his bodily resurrection, and that he died on the cross for our sins, and that we have to put our trust and faith in him. And these are essentials. Now, within this group, even with this group, we're going to disagree on theology, and we're going to disagree on, lots of things. And so there's lots of rooms within the house, but there are certain beliefs that we have to hold to be in the house, right? And so, one of the examples, he talks about this in the Ambassador's Guide. He's like, if I have these two pills, like I was talking to an LDS girl about this last week, and she was saying, well, I think basically we all teach the same thing. And Brett Kunkel was like, look, if I have two pills, and they look alike, and they're both white, and they're the same size, and they about weigh the same, right? But one of them is Tylenol and one of them is arsenic. Don't you think it's the differences that matter? One of them will cure your headache and one of them will kill you. And so think about with Mormonism, right? With Mormonism, they have a different view on almost every single essential issue of the Christian faith. They have a different view of God, a different view of Jesus, a different view of the gospel, a different view of the Bible, a different view of truth. I mean, everything that matters much more, different view of hell, Trinity, God, everything that matters, they have a different view. So this is why we would say, again, lovingly, that their views take them outside the house. Now, that's not an unloving thing. If you're a doctor and you have a patient that has cancer, but you don't want to hurt their feelings, so you don't want to tell them they have cancer, you're not a good doctor. You tell them they have cancer, then you also tell them, I have hopefully you've got the cure, right? So, but in our scenario, we tell somebody they have a disease, and that disease that they've been separated from God, but by God's grace, we have the cure, and that cure is putting their faith and trust in Jesus. So it is not loving. I'll say this 1,000 times over. It is not loving for you to not share the gospel with your unbelieving friends. You can't, well, I just want to love people. Preach the gospel, if necessary, use words. You guys heard this before? You cannot mime the gospel. You cannot mime the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. You can't, you have to use words. You have to share with them. You have to tell them that they are separated from God because of their sin, and they're destined for hell. But Jesus, right? So we have to be able to share these truths, but we also have to do it in a way that's loving and compassionate. And that's kind of, again, the goal, right, of what we're trying to accomplish with this trip. Yeah, John, did you have a question? I see your hand raised.
Well, I just wanted to reinforce what you said with a quote from one of my favorite atheists, Penn Jillette, and he said, if you believe there is a real heaven and there is a real hell, how much do you have to hate someone not to tell them?
Right. Yeah, I'll post. That's actually this. It's I'll post that. I'll post that in our group me tonight. That you should watch. Everyone should watch that whole interaction. Because it was after a show that Penn Jillette, he's a magician down in Vegas, and he comes on and he's just kind of telling the story of somebody who came up to him and shared the gospel. I think it was actually Ray Comfort, John. I don't know if that Ray Comfort, I've heard some different things. I think it was Ray Comfort that shared the gospel with him. But basically that, as John said, Jillette goes on to say, he says, look, if you were walking down the street and you see somebody in the street and a Mack truck is heading for them, you're going to, at some point, you're going to go tackle that person, right? Because you can say, hey, get out of the street, but at some point, if they're not listening, you're going to go tackle that person. Because why? They're going to die. And he says, if you believe what you believe, then every person who's not a Christian has a Mack truck headed for them. How much do you have to hate that person, John said, to not share the gospel with them? Now, it is not the case that means we just shove it down their throat and we yell at people. We have to, if I have the truth, then we'll talk about this in a second. The way in which I do it is clearly important. But we have too many Christians that think it doesn't matter because they've relativized their faith. They don't really probably know what they believe. They certainly don't have an exclusive view of truth. This is why that truth module is so important. So they don't even think that we need to share our faith. But I would say this is the most loving thing you could ever do. And what evangelizing the LDS will do for you is it will help you understand all these things. What does it mean to be a Christian? Why are you a Christian? You know, what is truth, God's nature, Jesus' nature, you know, all of these things, the fear of man. We're gonna hit Galatians hard throughout the week. Paul says at the end of Galatians 1, he seems to say that you cannot be a lover of man, you know, man's applause and a lover of the gospel at the same time. That's something that's super convicting to me. Most of the reasons why we don't evangelize is we're scared, right? We're scared of man. This is going to show that. This is going to bring that to the surface. And if you'll let it and kind of let God do his work in it, that's a good thing, right? So, you know, so it's important. I mean, many of you, hopefully, if you've been around Rosh Hashanah, you understand the gospel, right? We understand why this is important. You can never, you never go back to the basics enough. But I mean, you know, 1 Corinthians 15, there's a guy that I know who goes door knocking in Provo, former LDS, and he only uses 1 Corinthians 15. He said, because we can get the whole gospel, right? Just in 1 Corinthians 15. So I just want to read this, but, you know, I want to make sure that, you know, everything we're doing, right, is rooted in scripture. And again, be, you know, challenging, you know, everything that we say is up for discussion and debate, because if I'm saying things that are false, you know, please, you know, you owe it to me to correct me. But let me just read this, because this is, you know, Paul says, now I would remind you, brothers, of the gospel I preached. He's about to tell us the gospel I preached to you, which you received and which you stand. He says, by which you are being saved, if you hold fast the word I preached to you, unless you believed in vain. And then he says, for I delivered to you as a first importance. There's an awesome apologetics thing there. We talk about the creed, and it's, you know, it's awesome. But he says, but I delivered to you as a first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the scripture. So we get the substitutionary atonement right there. That he was buried, that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the scriptures, and we get his death, we get his resurrection. So we have his death, his substitutionary death, and his resurrection, right? And that he appeared to Cephas and then to the 12, then he appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time. And so we've got, you know, this is all the you know, whenever we talk about the evidence of the resurrection, we're all going to use 1 Corinthians 15, but you get Jesus's substitutionary atonement, right? And you get his resurrection. So we get the nature of God, right? Who God is, who we are. We're sinners separated from a holy, righteous, and just God, right? And we deserve separation from him forever. But God, right? The two greatest words, but God said, I'm not going to leave them that way. And so Jesus, in the form, you know, the second person of the Trinity, comes down, lives a sinless life, and then willingly goes to the cross. And if I put my faith and trust in him, right, then my sin is exchanged for his righteousness, the marvelous exchange. And that's a free gift. And it's amazing. And so we have the antidote to death, right? I mean, you know, at the end of 1 Corinthians 15, Paul's like, you know, where, O death, is your victory? Where is your sting? Because in Jesus, death has been defeated. And so we are not, you know, high philosophers going to teach somebody else some high philosophy. We're one beggar showing another beggar where they can get some food. And that should be everything about that should incorporate the way in which we have these conversations, not in an aggressive way, not in a, you know, trying to make someone look stupid way, not in a, you know, I'm smart, you're not, I'm right, you're wrong. No, because we were not good candidates. No one on this call, no one who's going to, you know, who's a Christian was ever a likely candidate, was a good candidate, because all of us were sinners. While we were all sinners, Christ died for us. So we get, you know, we talk about it in Galatians 5, it is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Walk, you know, don't go back to that slavery, right? But walk in this freedom. And we get to show people this freedom. And we get to do that with anybody who doesn't know Jesus. And so for some of us, we have to understand that. We have to understand what that freedom is. And this trip will help us to see that. All right. But again, we would say these are not our enemies, right? The people that we're going to talk about, they are not our enemies. They are spiritual prisoners of war. And spiritual prisoners of war we're not going to yell, you know, if someone's cuffed up in his cell, you're not going to come in and yell at them. You're not going to get angry. You're going to go and lovingly kind of open the gate, and you've got a key, and you're going to help them unlock their cuffs. And we're going to help them, and we're going to try to not make them look stupid. And we're going to try to encourage them. And we're going to love them. And we're going to do all while we're also challenging them with the objective truth of the gospel. And we're going to try to do all that in one conversation, and that's hard, and I get it. And then we're going to fail at that miserably, and we're going to get up and we're going to do it again and again, because it's not dependent on us, but we're going to get a chance to get up to bat. But if we love the gospel, if we love the true gospel, then we should hate the false gospels. Paul says, right, we're going to look in Galatians 1, right? There is no other gospel. And we should hate these other false gospels. And you're going to experience a county, in Utah County, in a state, the state of Utah, that's enveloped in a false gospel, whether that's Mormonism or now secularism. Most, 60, 70% of those that are walking away from Mormonism are going to secularism, still a false gospel, right? So we love them enough to share the gospel with them, but we have to be doing it in love. There are plenty of Christians that evangelize the LDS, but it doesn't seem like if you're not kind of preaching to someone in tears, like because you care for their soul, that's a problem. I mean, there's plenty of people that just want to smack information at people, and it sounds like they're almost happy that these people are separated from God. So it should break our hearts. So let me help you to see, and then we'll just look at a couple things from tactics. But here's a way that I have started thinking about this, okay? Because I think this is a way that we can to get away from the it's just going to turn into a philosophy discussion, or we're just going to demonstrate to them by 3 verses that they're wrong, and they're going to fall down on their knees and they're going to worship Jesus. Now, could Jesus do that? Of course he could, and praise God, maybe it'll happen. But Malcolm Gladwell, he wrote a book called Talking to Strangers. Malcolm Gladwell has written Outliers, and I don't agree with everything Gladwell says, but he's an interesting guy. And I like his book. And so I was reading this book, Talking to Strangers, and he tells this story in this book. Now, the details aren't going to be exactly specific, but you'll get the point. But he tells a story of, I think it was the CIA, or FBI, or one of the high-level espionage sort of detection agencies in the government. And he tells a story about how this was, I think, the mid-90s, they got intel that there was a spy in their agency. Okay, so they got intel, there's a spy in their agency, and there was a guy whose literal job was to detect people were lying to him. I mean, that's what he was. He had been trained. He could probably be a great poker player, right? Because he could always tell when people are lying, right? And so his job was to tell if people are lying, and he would go all over the world to detect, to watch videos and to interview people and find, knew all the tells, right? And so he finds out he gets intel, there's a spy within his own agency. So his job is to go and talk to everybody in the agency. And he does. He talks to everybody in the agency, and he's like, there's not a spy in here. There's no spy. There's no spy. And then it was like 5 or 10 years later, they find out that this woman who had been in the agency for decades was literally a Cuban spy. They got found out. So she got outed. She really was a Cuban spy. And so the guy, he's like, how did I miss this, right? And he goes back, and he had taped, my understanding, he had taped the interactions. And he goes back and he watches that tape, and he says, watching it now with the information I have, he said, she literally gave me every single clue imaginable that she was lying. Everything that I'm trained to pick up on, everything, she was giving it to me. He's like, it was like almost like an entry level exam that if I would have failed. And I was one of the best. He said, so he starts saying, why is that? Why would I miss that when it seems so obvious now? And then he said, why? Because I knew her. I was friends with her. I went to her kids' birthday parties. I cried with her. I had lunch with her. And so I think that is such a helpful paradigm for help us to understand. You are going to talk to some. So let's say you had a meeting with the missionary. The missionary thinks they're going to be sharing with you the true gospel that they have known their entire life. They've never asked really any questions for the most part. They've been taught it. They've been indoctrinated by it, right? And now you come and you tell them that they're wrong. And we think that they're just going to give it, they're like, oh, I guess I'm wrong. And they're just going to, just convert right away. Let me ask you this question. For those on take the person who's most special to you. And I came to you tomorrow and I said, your mom or your dad or, whatever is a Cuban spy. What would your initial reaction be? It would not be, oh, I guess you're right? What if I had good evidence? Would you be defensive? 100% you'd be defensive. Would you be objective? Probably not. Would it happen in one conversation? Would I just come to you, present some evidence, and then you're like, well, I guess my mom's a Cuban spy. And then you would just call the police and, turn her in and, then you go to Jimmy John's and get dinner. No, I mean, like it would be this long process, right? And you'd have to wrestle with it. You have to think about it. What would let's say we had multiple conversations, my demeanor, my attitude as I'm telling you this, would that matter? Yes, it would matter. Now apply this to Mormons. Think about you're going to meet people that their whole life have believed something. And Mormonism is, it's very much like Islam. It's not just, where you go on Sundays. This is their whole life, especially Utah Mormons, especially Mormons that we're going to talk to, the LDS down in Utah County. These are people who everything about their life is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, their friends, their family, everything about, and you're telling them that what they believe is false. Not only that, but this teaching is sort of out of favor now, but traditional LDS teaching is the only people that will go to outer darkness, which is really what we understand as hell, are former Mormons who knew the truth and have walked away with it from it. So that you're not just threatening them that they're going to lose all their friends, all their family, everything they've ever known. You're also threatening potentially with outer darkness. And so if we have that mindset, then it helps to soften our hearts for these conversations. It helps us to think about what is our goal in these conversations? Because I think too many of us, 1,000% me included, when I first got started, we just want to argue with them and we just want to give them the verses that demonstrate that what they believe is false. But I think about it like someone's trying to tell you that your mom's a Cuban spy. You're not just going to listen to that. It's going to take time. So our job is, and this is going to, some of the things that we just talked about with tactics, our job is using tactics is to put a stone in their shoe. Okay. Statistically, if somebody leaves Mormonism for Christianity, biblical Christianity, it takes an average of 7 years. 7 years from their first doubt to when they walk away. Now, if you think about that, that's probably hundreds of conversations, hundreds of interactions. Now, what that means is maybe all you're going to be is conversation 1 or 5 or 10 on a 200 conversation journey that this person is entering into. And if you think you're going to get to the foot of, you have to get to the foot of the cross, and you think that it's, you have to beat them over the head with all these different verses, and they, force them to submit right then it's going to be contentious. It's not going to go well. If you think my goal is to put a stone in their shoe, my goal is to get them to think, my goal is to maybe move them one step further from when they are. My goal is just to get up to bat. My goal is to make them want to have another conversation. Then that changes our whole paradigm. Let me just give you one example. We were out evangelizing with some of our students. This was like last week, and we were talking to this guy. This guy was an atheist, but interesting guy. Was very open. We're having a good conversation. It was very much, we'll talk about here in a second, the tactical approach, asking him lots of questions. And then somebody else came up who was kind of part of our group. And they just started kind of more attacking the person, and they were challenging him, and the person would respond, and they would just start attacking their, here's why you're wrong, here's why you're wrong. And that happened for about, when we had been talking to this guy for about 15 minutes, that happened for about 2 minutes, and then he left. So it got contentious. He just wasn't interested anymore. Now, when we were asking him questions, the tactical approach, you've read the book, when we were asking him questions, we're making him do the work, and we were kind of, we were guiding the conversation, but we were taking it where we want to go. It was very low key. It was very relaxed. We were joking, but we were still able to accomplish way more than just coming at him and attacking him. So the approach that we're going to try to teach is the tactical approach, where you're learning to ask questions and you're advancing the conversation, but you're doing it in a way that, again, like we said, that's honoring God. Again, if I get angry, I lose. If they get angry, I lose, because I'm not just trying to win a conversation. I'm trying to introduce this person to Jesus, right? So I could win a conversation or win an argument and lose the war, so to speak. I could lose the goal, because the goal is not to win an argument. The goal is that they would find the freedom that we have in Jesus. And so again, I got to get up to bat, but I got to have this mindset, right? This is a person you're talking to. Think about when y'all were talking. Now, missionary conversation may be a little different, but did you get the person's name? Did you find out anything about them? Did you know? Did you ask them how? anything about them, or did it just turn into, sometimes I call it, Bible verse ping pong. We're just bouncing verses off each other. These are human beings, like, people to be loved, right? These are not projects to be won. So our goal in every conversation is just to get up to bat, to make them want to have another conversation, but we're trying to put a stone in their shoe. Now, here's one of the things that you found in all your conversations. Probably they went all over the place. So one of the things that we're going to try to teach you to do is, and this is why in the modules, we only focus on 5 things. The nature of, in Brett's book that you're reading, The Ambassador's Guide, 5 things. The nature of God, the nature of truth, nature of God, nature of Jesus, the Bible, and the gospel. And maybe in Brett's book, it's mostly just truth, God, and the gospel. Maybe you don't get into, but you're just going to focus on those things. And so you're going to try to think, okay, if they can walk away with a stone in their shoe about maybe they're wrong, or maybe the gospel, maybe they're wrong in the gospel, whatever it is, that's a win. And so we're not getting frustrated when we don't get exactly all the way where we want to go. Now, if it goes all the way, then great. But if it only goes that far, that's okay. So we have to get out of this idea that I have to get to the foot of the cross in every conversation. The other thing I'm not trying to do is make them look foolish. Most people, this is evangelicals as well, but most people have not thought through their religious convictions well. This is Mormons, this is atheists, this is evangelicals. And you can make somebody look stupid if you have thought about what you believe and why you believe it by just, challenging them and trying to make them look foolish to show that they haven't thought through it. What's the point in that? That's not a good goal. So many times in the conversation, we're trying to actually save them from looking foolish, because again, the goal, most times, if have you ever been confronted with a view that you hold theologically that someone challenges you on, and you kind of, in the conversation, you kind of start to realize, maybe it's not that, maybe it's some other, important issue, but you start to realize maybe you're wrong. Most of the time, we will not admit it in that conversation because we have pride, right? We're prideful people. I know I am. But what we will do is when we go home that night, maybe I'll open my Bible, or when I'm laid down at night, I'll start thinking about it. I'm gonna go, that's a good point. I need to think about that. That is our goal. We don't have to, we think we have to win the conversation right there. No, we want someone to, when they walk away, to think about it. And then we reeked of Jesus so much that they're like, I kind of want to keep talking to this person. I mean, when we were at the trip in March, we started talking to one of the students. We're going to go door to door in Provo, and we met the student and we talked to them, and he was like, I just like talking to y'all, me and my partner, because I don't feel like I can talk to anybody about this. And you guys just seem like you're letting me just talk and be honest and open up. You cannot admit your doubts within the LDS church. You cannot admit your doubts within much of evangelicalism, right? And so, but just a place where he could just be honest about his doubts was inviting to him, and he wanted to keep talking, and we're going to keep talking, right? He's learning to trust us, and then that gives us an opportunity to share the truth with him, right? Now, everyone's got reservations. We're going to skip through some of this. Everyone's got reservations, but again, our goal is to get up to bat, right? And I can send some of these slides, but you guys have, if you've read Tactics, you've been through these, but I wanted to get to this last little part, but just asking questions, right? It puts you in the driver's seat, but you're making the other person do all the work. So the student I was talking about last week, after that person left, I was talking to him. I was like, hey, have you, who was doing all the work in that conversation? And he, he was, right? Because they would say something, then he would rebut it. Then they would say something, and he would rebut it. And I said, well, if you use the tactical approach, think about, they have to make a claim, and you're asking them about their belief, and you're asking them how they came to that conclusion. And guess what? They're doing all the work. And then also they're having to think about their claim, because in that same evangelistic opportunity I talked to this LDS guy, and he literally talked to me for 30 minutes without taking a breath. He just started talking and never stopped. And about 5 minutes in, I just checked out. Like, he wasn't even answering my question. I had a specific question I asked him, and but he never took a breath. He never gave me an opportunity. So that was he probably thinks that he was, sharing the truth, but it was a failed opportunity on his part, because we never actually had a meeting of the minds. But if I'm doing all the talking, I don't know where they are. So, but if I'm asking them questions, I can find out. That's why the questions are so helpful. And again, the Columbo is really important. So some of you talked about, all right, one of the terms, Columbo 1, what do you mean by that? One of the sort of sayings that we have out here is, with the LDS, we're using the same lexicon, the exact same words, but a very, very, very different dictionary. Okay, so here are just some of the words. So just atonement, baptism, eternal life, the fall, God, the gospel, hell, salvation, Satan, unforgivable sin. These are all words that the LDS will use and have a very completely different meaning than what we would use. So just for example, if you ask the LDS, let's look at salvation. If you ask the LDS about salvation, they will say salvation is by grace through faith alone. And then you'll say, wait a minute, I thought y'all believed in works, and I've been always taught y'all believe in works. I go, no, we believe everyone's saved by grace, by what Jesus did on the cross. Everyone's saved. But for the LDS, so for us, we're using salvation as the end, right? The new heavens and the new earth because of what Jesus did for us on the cross. For them, the end, the goal is eternal life. So then you have to ask them, but how do I get eternal life? That's a very different question than how is one saved? Do you see the difference? So you have to know the questions, but you can figure this out by just asking them, okay, what do you mean by salvation? What do you mean by these questions, right? And as you study this a little more, you'll start to see, but every one of these words, they mean something completely different. So it's, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? It kind of feels like you're just asking all the time, but you're not just, what do you mean that? What do you mean that? What do you mean that? Right? You're learning how to do it in a conversation, but you've got to drill down and you'll realize that you're talking about two very different starting points when you finally do. And that'll save you from tons of confusion in these conversations. The other thing with Columbo 2, like we talked about, how did you come to that conclusion? Right? And so there's some other things we can talk about this, but how did you come to that conclusion? So whatever they say, this happens most of the time when people are evangelizing. They will make a claim and we will think that it's our job to refute that claim. When I was a lawyer, right, when the state would charge my client with a crime, the state had to prove my client guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. So the state had the burden of proof. The state had to prove that my client was guilty. When someone makes a claim and then I take the burden from them and I just start running them, I remove that from them. So we will graciously allow, someone says, someone will make a claim, we'll graciously assume that they've come to a conclusion and we'll ask them, how do you come to that conclusion? So, think about, there's just, all matter is eternal. That's they believe ultimately that all matter is eternal, that, God didn't create out of nothing, but sort of formed the universe out of existing matter. How'd you come to that conclusion? That's interesting. Tell me more about that. Is that philosophically possible? I think no, but tell me more. How'd you come to that conclusion? There's an infinite regress of gods. All right. Number one, how'd you come to that conclusion? And then if you get into Columbo 3, have you considered that if there's an infinite regress of gods, then it never got started? There's no uncaused first cause. I've had that conversation with LDS before, but I'm just using the questions to get where I want to go, right? They'll say that, heaven is divided into 3 levels. You got the celestial, the telestial, and terrestrial. How'd you come to that conclusion? Same with baptism for the dead. How'd you come to that conclusion? They will take you to 1 Corinthians 15. Your homework assignment tonight would be, or this week, whenever you're watching this, is to read 1 Corinthians 15, and you will find in 1 Corinthians 15 the mention of baptism for the dead, and if you read the King James Version, celestial and terrestrial. The question is, do we get from 1 Corinthians 15 all of what the LDS claim is true about the baptism for the dead? And I would say 100% no. But this is important. You got to know they're going to bring this up, and this happened to some people before. But how did you come to that conclusion? How did you come to the conclusion that just because baptism for the dead is mentioned in 1 Corinthians 15, that therefore it's both encouraged and it's all the things that you believe it is, right? And that's going to take you to the real issue for them, which is the Book of Mormon, Joseph Smith's experience, these kind of things. And there's other things that, the Bible is the word of God as far as it's been translated correctly, right? How did you come to the conclusion that the Bible hasn't been translated correctly? They will almost, all of them will tell you it's like the telephone game. You probably heard this from atheists before. It's funny that Mormons will actually read Bart Ehrman and quote Bart Ehrman just as much as the atheists, because they're trying to undermine the reliability of the Bible, even though it's one of their sacred works. It's crazy, and it's the work of the evil one. But you could ask them, if you study textual, criticism at all, right? How did you come to the conclusion that the Bible's been mistranslated? Because it's not the telephone game. If you study textual criticism, it's not at all like the telephone game. In fact, it's the exact opposite of that. And you can kind of have that conversation. But you're doing all of this by asking questions. You're not getting contentious. They're not getting contentious. Well, maybe they're getting frustrated, but you're trying to, again, put a rock in their shoe, right? The goal, metaphorically, but the goal is to get them to walk away from that conversation on one topic. So try as hard as you can. We're sticking to one topic. And this is true of all of our conversations with atheists, whatever, because they're going to want to go all over the place. You're just like, okay, this is important, but can we go back to this? Because I don't think we actually settled this. This is my problem with the infinite regress of gods. And at least get them, I've had guys say, yeah, I see what you're saying. Let me think about that. That's great. And that's where the conversation ended. We exchanged numbers. That was the end of the conversation. I didn't have to get to the foot of the cross. And I still think it was a very productive conversation. And there's other things, again, if you in my quad, I have the Impossible Gospel from the Ambassador's Guide. I have it marked out, and I will walk people through that. That's something that you might, well, the next meeting, I'll give you a couple techniques, and when you're here, of how maybe you want to start conversations with them, and some ways that you could, some ways, avenues that you could start with. But that's a way you could go as well. But try to have a goal. That's why I want to have a goal. So I want a goal in mind. I want to really talk about why I believe what I believe. I want to talk about the reliability of the Bible, and maybe in a conversation your goal changes as someone tells you, something that comes up, and you're like, I really want to zero in on that, and then you want to focus through questions on moving the ball down the field. Again, maybe I'm 10th conversation in 150 conversation journey that this person has, right? Okay, and then we're always evaluating. So this is why we ask you to do this in writing, but every time I have a conversation afterwards, what did I do well? Oh, I could have said this better. How could I review the conversation, act out scenarios. Every time we go out, when y'all are here, you'll go with partners. And so you'll, how do we do? What, we can challenge each other. I think I mentioned to this group or the other group, there was a guy this last trip, and we went, we're going to go on the first day. We're going to go to second day. We're going to go to Temple Square, and you'll talk to lots of missionaries. And Temple Square is where the temple is, and they have the history museum. There's all kinds of stuff and lots of conversations. And he was getting in a very contentious conversation with one of the missionaries. And we talked about it afterwards. He thought about it. He realized maybe he was doing some things differently. And then the rest of the trip, he improved. He thought about it and he improved. And so that's the goal. Every time we get up to bat, we can walk away and we can get better. And, we'll always be there to help you wrestle through these to learn. But the goal is to just get up to bat. We don't have to be perfect, right? And there's some other, obviously, things and tactics, that we could talk about more, especially if you've read it. Then we got videos on tactics, all these kind of things as well. So, okay, all right. I know I'm 13 minutes over my allotted time, but any questions or comments, or, does that make sense? Again, the idea is thinking about, so just kind of summary, thinking about what you're asking somebody to do when you're asking them to change their worldview. Thinking about it in that sense, talking to strangers. What if my mom was a Cuban spy? When I go up to somebody now, I think, okay, Schaefer said, what if I'm talking to somebody for an hour, I'm asking them questions for 55 minutes, and I'm praying, God, give me one or two good questions to ask this person to put a stone in their shoe. And we, hopefully we can ask some more questions, but my goal is to one of those 5 areas. Why those 5 areas? Because those are the essentials. I could spend all the time in the world talking about baptism for the dead, and I never actually, let's say I convinced them, we have a whole conversation about that, but I've never dealt with the real issue, maybe polygamy. I wanted to focus on those 5 issues and maybe the gospel, because then I get a chance to share the gospel with them. I get a chance for them to read 1 Corinthians 15 or read Ephesians 2, 8 through 10. We can talk about them together, read Galatians 1 together. So that's my mindset. These are spiritual POWs. And then my goal is through questions to advance the conversation where I'm putting a stone in their shoe. So it's going to be productive if we walk out there like, that's a good point. Let me think about that. That's a productive conversation. And that I want them to want to have more conversations. We've met with lots of people that have said, this is a great conversation. I'd like to continue this. Let's keep talking. We've had lots of people that have said that we've tried to follow up with, and they haven't followed up with us. So, we don't know how it's going to turn out, but we've had plenty of people that we have followed up with that have continued to want to talk. And, we're praying that God obviously would save them. So, okay. All right. Questions, comments, anybody, just anything that, struck you with that, anything that you think would be helpful, any disagreements? Anybody still awake? So, all right. Well, if you don't, I know, that a lot of things to think about. John, do you have a question or a comment, or we're gonna see your face?
No, I think that's awesome. I think I'm just right on board with you. I've had tons and tons of not as much as you, but many conversations with Mormons, and my wife and I go on LDS.com or whatever their current website's called, and we order missionaries to come to our house, and we've had them over for lunch, and I've gone on hikes with them, and it's been just so fun. I just love doing it, and I couldn't be more excited about our trip. So,
and I mean, it's just this is like what John's saying. And so this is not just LDS. Like, this is just every, like when this becomes kind of the rhythm of your life. And this is not true for me. One of the things that this has happened to me more since I've been out in Utah, where this has become the part of just, evangelism, because you can't help but walk out of the door, and meet people that don't believe what you believe. But when it is that way, then it's like John said, it becomes this sort of evangelistic adventure. What could God do today just by me asking somebody, hey, what do you believe about this? I mean, we're teaching an evangelism class at our church. And so one of the things people had to do this week was get up to bat. We challenged them to have one evangelistic conversation. And we told them the same thing. Doesn't have to be for the cross, just, one. And we're starting to get, so they have to do with journals. And what a lady just sent her feedback, and she's like, I prayed for opportunities to share, to get in these conversations all week, and God never opened a door. And I'm going to lovingly push back and say, you literally walked by 10,000 people this week that you could have just said, how's the weather? Oh, that's great. Oh, what do you think about the weather? Blah, blah. Do you think God does? I don't know. You can turn any conversation into an evangelistic conversation. And when that becomes part of the rhythm of your life, like, you're wanting to engage, you're wanting to get involved, because you just never know what God's going to do. And so part of this trip is to make that, hopefully, just kind of, just part of our DNA, where this is just part of just, we're at the gas station and we end up getting 2-hour conversations about, the infinite regress problem, and then you have to tell your wife why you're late for dinner. And then she's like, okay, because she expects that now, but yeah, so I agree with John. This is the more it actually has made my faith come alive, the more I'm evangelizing, right? The more I'm excited, because also I'm finding out areas that I'm like, oh, I don't know. That's a great question. I never thought about that. And I'm having to research it and study it. Yeah.
And, with respect to the lady who said that God didn't open any doors for her, I would just say you're lying. You're just flat out lying. Because that God wants us to do that. That's our main job on this side of eternity, is loving God and loving people by sharing the gospel. And I'm not touting myself as some sort of the epicenter of evangelistic whatever. But anyways, it's just such an amazing blessing, and God's opened so many doors for me. It's just by being open to sharing my faith, and it has been a life-changing and faith-changing opportunity or reality for me, and I'm just super excited to grow more.
Yeah, now I mean, it's always good. It's not a good call unless I step on somebody's toes at some point. So that John brought something up. So let me just kind of lovingly push maybe on. A lot of people will use the idea of waiting for God to kind of open these doors, right? And I would argue to you that what God wants for us is to grow up and to step out. And so God wants us to step into these situations, and then we trust God, because we're now in this situation. And so many of us are waiting for, there's a teaching that we do on God's will for your life that I think, that so much we're waiting on God to just do this stuff. And God's wanting us to grow up, and he's wanting us to step out in faith. And he's wanting us to that we are imagers of God, and we get a chance to share that. And so we're looking for opportunities to do that, not because we're perfect and then we trust God and we make mistakes, but so many of us, I say this lovingly, but we're spiritualizing our man-centeredness. We're spiritualizing it, and then we're like, well, God just never gave you an opportunity. But really, it's because I'm nervous to step up. You will never not be nervous. I mean, every time I go to have a conversation, immediately in my head, I'm like, I shouldn't do this. I'm kind of hungry. I need to use the bathroom. I come up with all the excuses in the world. And then you get in the conversation, and then you're like, wow, that was great, or it was terrible. You just never know, right? You just never know how it's going to turn out. But that's what Lee Strobel calls it, the evangelistic apologetics adventure. And he has some great stories about that. So maybe I'll post a couple things in our group me, the Penn Jillette that John, story that John talked, and then I'll talk the story that Lee Strobel tells about his journey. Because it should excite us. You never know the person you talk to, you never know how God's going to use it. The only way we're going to find out is by getting up to bat. And that's what we're going to do over and over and over, when you're here on the trip. So, all right. I know it's 21 minutes past when I told you I would be done now. So here's what I'll do. I will, let me just pray for us real quick, and then I'll stop recording. And then if anybody needs to, if you have any questions, you want to hang out, you want to, ask, I can stay for however long and ask questions. Try to talk and ask questions, whether it's logistics or anything. But if you, ideally, so just kind of summarizing everything, if you, this week, if you can get me the balance of the 400, and that way just all the finances can be set aside. If you have any questions about the pre-trip itinerary, if you're doing any of that, let me know, because we're going to take now 2 weeks off. I think it's 2 weeks off. And then we will meet again via Zoom the 22nd. So the May trip will be here in 2 weeks. And then, Sunday, the 22nd, we will meet again for the third Zoom session. I've got some other things that I'm just kind of, again, just trying to help you as you hopefully try to get up to bat again, try to have some more conversations. And I got some other things that I want to help you with that on. And then, we'll have one more Zoom session, and then y'all be here on the 4th. So we're super excited to get y'all out here, and just really excited to see what God will do through this group. You just never know what God will do through a group of people that are just excited about sharing the gospel. So, all right, let me pray for us real quick, and then we'll end the recording. Father, thank you for this group. Thank you for these students. I pray for all of them that are in the middle of finals and all that they've got going on. I know that it's, many of them have just, this tremendous weight on them through finals. And so just pray for your spirit of freedom that will come on them, that their identity is not in their grades. Their identity is in you, Jesus, and help us to all see that. Help us to get that deep down in our bones, Lord, but give them some relief and some rest and just some encouragement and some stamina as they finish off exams, Lord. But then as they end exams, help them to just get excited about the opportunity to share the gospel, get excited about bringing the gospel literally to an unreached people group, getting excited about learning more about what they believe and why they believe it, and what you're going to do in and through their lives in the next month, Lord. And that really this can be this really flag in the ground, pivotal moment, time in their faith journey. And we just don't know what you're going to do in and through this group, but we're excited to find out, and we're excited to get to share the gospel. You don't need us. It's not like you need us in any way to do all this, but yet you have chosen to make the proclamation of the gospel by sinful, fallen human beings, but redeemed because of you, Jesus. You've made the proclamation of the gospel the way in which people will get saved. And so our proclamation of the gospel, then you take care of your part, and luckily your part is way more important than our part. But our job is just to get up to bat, and what an opportunity we have to walk in that. And I pray, Lord, that you would use the training and even some of the stuff we talked about tonight to help each person who's watching this kind of examine their own life, their own spiritual life, Lord, and maybe find some areas that we need to think better about, or some areas that we need to be more relational. We need to just love you more. We need to just confess where we're not spending the time with you. I know that that's an area that I just confess that I just want to spend more time with you. I just love you. And so we're just grateful for the opportunity that when we blow it, that your mercy and grace is bigger than all that, Lord. So again, thank you for these students. Thank you for all the work that you're doing and will do in their lives, Lord. And just bring us back safely in a couple of weeks, back for our third Zoom session, Lord. We love you. Praise in Jesus' name. Amen.